Thanks, guys, for joining me today. I was there at the dawn of mobile, like the dawn of many things. And as the mobile market began to take off, I felt like I was in a Formula One car racing around a racetrack, pulling a couple of G's in the turns. When I think about both the opportunity and risk associated with IoT, it feels more like I'm in some sort of Elon Musk rocket about to get launched off. And of course, I have to keep returning back to do other things and launch off again, pulling 17 or 20 Gs or something. So it's an exciting market. There's a lot of opportunity. We're very early in the market. And so I have two great panelists who have a lot of experience in this area, especially given that it's such an early market. And they've got some pretty interesting stories to talk about. So first, let's talk a little bit about, first, the very tiny little company on the end. Gilson, talk a little bit about Oracle and what you guys do. And then Aaron, maybe introduce ClearBlade.
Yeah, so I'm very happy to be here today. I'm representing Oracle Engineering, and we're going to share some very interesting case. We had a chance to work with ClearBlade team, and I hope you enjoyed that. Have a lot of topics we're going to be covering here. And later on, we can have a one-on-one talk after this presentation if you want to get in deep of some specific topics that we're going to be covering here.
Aaron?
So ClearBlade, I think we had a chance to speak to a lot of you folks already, but IoT middleware kind of is the boring word to it all, but it's that platform and edge. But really, we've been enjoying and had a really good relationship with Oracle, trying to prove out some of the scalability solutions and architectures that are necessary for where we're going in this rocket ship.
Well, there you go. So that's a good launch point into the first question. We're going to talk a lot about scaling. It's a very early market. And so why is it really important to start thinking about the tenets of scaling as you talk a little bit about what you've seen with customers and why this is so important given where we are in this marketplace?
Sure. So, I think, and I'll reiterate kind of where we've come from with mobile, and we certainly saw mobile surprise us by the scale that happened there. The interesting thing is now when you look at what we're getting ready to do with IoT, and in mobile it was kind of, we could predict it. We rolled out an app and we said if we doubled, tripled, quadrupled, if it scaled up, we still knew what we were talking about. What we're seeing with IoT, and the reason why ClearBlade's working with partners who know this, all sides of the scale, or at least major parts of this scale, is you roll out 7 sensors or you connect up one factory, and the business immediately sees, oh, we got these 4 data points, let's add 100 more to each. And so you scaling down here, which then scales across the top, and the scale points are very different. So there's a very big need to address and at least make sure you're architecting this for this very rapidly changing set of data that's flying in.
In the cloud market, you've seen this need for scale. People started talking about just moving storage into one area, but it's really grown to be a very different set of metrics and configurations, right? So you've seen some of that evolution.
Oh yeah, scalability is one of the main benefits of using cloud nowadays. Whenever your IoT workloads increase, then you can increase your environment along with it. And not just that, but when you don't need those resources, you can remove them and pay for what you're using. So that's one of the main benefits of using cloud. So there's that limitless scalability option that you can use whenever you need more power. You get more power. When you no longer need that power, just get rid of that cost and continue doing your daily basis work.
Yeah, so one of the interesting challenges for a lot of organizations is making that decision to when to go to cloud, when to go to on-prem. And so this is a net new application, and taking advantage of the elasticity by leveraging cloud, I guess, is really important, which kind of leads into my next question, is that we've been scaling up systems for a long time. What's different about IoT? What do we have to be thinking about?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is the fact that it's so much more dynamic. I look at the mobile stuff we did, and we had 5 insurance claims a day per 100, and you knew what your scale was going to be. Here we turn on one machine and it sends us just a little bit of data, and then suddenly it cranks up and we didn't even see it expected. It's so much more of a dynamic load, and then it proliferates so much faster. As we move towards these ideas of digital twins, we go from not just wanting the temperature.
So what's a digital twin then?
A digital twin, oh yeah, good point. So the easy thing to do is just to pull sensor data in. but as you want to understand it, you put these into the objects that are in your real world. So you build the auditorium, you build these things to basically describe that digital twin of the auditorium, of the tractor, of the
Farm, the
whatever
hospital,
you got.
right.
And so you can very quickly keep piling on to that twin to enrich the data. The information might come from even enterprise systems now. And so that rate of change is so much faster and so much less predictable than it was with mobile, and that was certainly a challenge. So I think IoT is going to exacerbate what we've already seen.
Do you see in some of the engagements those kind of scenarios already beginning to build?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, when we talk about IoT, you have the whole cloud computing as the backbone to help the data travel to its destination. So it's very important to get access to the data very easily and provide access to that data to your end user as much easy as possible. So with cloud today, for example, if you want to get access to your data in Frankfurt, in a matter of minutes, you can have a machine up and running there to work with your IoT data where you're collecting information. And in the old world, I mean, you would have to go to all this legal procurement process to get a whole data center up and running in Frankfurt, for example, to get to manipulate and to use the data there. And when we're talking about IoT, we're talking about a very large amount of data that we need to manipulate, we need to process. So it's very important that you guys can have access to that hardware and power as much easy as possible.
In these early days, so when I start hearing a lot of the language that you use, you're really talking about decisions of on-prem versus up in the cloud, CapEx versus OpEx kind of spending. Are you already beginning to hear lots of conversations about how people start and where they're allocating budgets, more CapEx versus OpEx? What does that look like today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Oracle today has more than 430,000 customers, and the majority of those customers that are either migrating to the cloud or working in their cloud strategy. So, and usually people start with very small things like, okay, just for DR or backup. Then they get their feet wet, and then once they see, okay, cloud's not this complex thing that everybody's talking about, so it's easy to use and it's very cost effective. That's when we start seeing this whole migration happening. And one of the main benefits of cloud as well from our perspective is that we do support a hybrid mode, that you can keep some services running in your data center that you cannot move to the cloud, along with some other services that you can definitely move to the cloud to save some costs on your side.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When you start thinking about this combination of there's services at the edge, there's services at the core, and we have some of the existing back office systems, and now we're adding in layers of machine learning and advanced intelligence. Are there any particular trends that you're beginning to see as people are taking a real hard look at either the POCs or production versions of some of their architectures? So what kind of major trends are you seeing out there?
So I definitely think we're seeing, and when we look at the tests that we work together to prove out, to prove the scalability, we're really seeing a layered approach. We proved a 3-tier architecture, but that architecture can be stacked even greater.
You and I talked a little bit about the software. I'm going to call it software emulation. Maybe that's not the right term, but you built an emulation model that sort of proved out some of the requirements that you guys were shooting after. Talk a little bit about that, and then come back to your architecture point, because I think it's a really important point that you have the capability to take a real close look at being able to model some of those requirements well in advance of people actually deploying, even if they're alpha or beta systems out there. I think it's really critical.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, there's certainly it's certainly early, and I think it's even earlier for the IoT test tools in this space right now. So if you're thinking of a good idea, test tools are a good opportunity to be working on.
Yeah, we definitely got to come back to that topic too, right?
But how do you model the idea of 100 million devices, right? You can't go get 100 million devices to put in your lab. Yeah. So you really do have to spend time. And you have to leverage virtual resources to even emulate these sorts of things. And it takes a whole effort on its own to put all these devices in place, attach profiles to them that look like what they're actually going to do. Are they going to be machine streaming hex data? Are they going to be just latent hello messages, whatever you want to do.
Is it two-way? Is it one-way? Right.
What's that level of connection? And then, when you're trying to do 100 million devices, you're assuming this is global, but you're assuming there's some level of connectivity from that device in Austin to that device in Shanghai or wherever you might be going around the world.
Right.
So that two-way communication is something else that you have to really.
So beginning to software model what some of those architectural components is really an important first step before people just start throwing sensors to the wind and hope, with a hope and a pray, I guess, right?
Yeah, so you want to be able to model it, and then the question that always happens somewhere along the way as we're doing this pilot of, well, how can we scale, right? And as a software guy or a nerd, I'd always just say, well, it always depends, right? Which is never a good answer. So we work really hard to give our partners and clients and customers tools that let them define that profile and then be able to hit the buttons that say go use Oracle Cloud or one of the other cloud vendors to simulate that workload and see what we're capable of, because there is a lot of.
When I talk to a lot of organizations that are beginning to take a look at IoT kinds of solutions, they're not necessarily thinking about artificial intelligence or even machine-to-machine learning. They're sort of looking at what the near-term bet is, what's sort of the, what can do this year to create a win, what are the stage bets, and maybe they have long-term what their sort of tsunami world kind of business change, I guess, in the end. Do you see people beginning to think in some of those terms and think about how do I do remote monitoring, and then maybe how do I do triggers and alerts? Or do you make those kinds of recommendations to learn to walk before you run? Or what are you seeing people asking for out there today?
Well, certainly, and we did this in kind of the boardroom briefing of what I see, and I'll let you chime in and say it, but what we see is there's certainly a vision, executive vision to robots doing everything in virtual reality and AI all along the way.
Yeah.
But there is definitely a maturity model of let's get things connected first, right? We can let our data scientists work on the data we have, but we really have to get it connected and get some real data.
Right.
To empower those data scientists to understand our domain, to start working towards that end. But that connectivity is first, and even then you don't understand it. So there's kind of an interpretation and a normalizing of that data, and then that moves into what would we want to do now that we have it? Then that moves into finally acting a bit. So still a human hitting those buttons, still a human that's looking at that data to figure out what to do with it. And then after you've walked all that way and now you're jogging a little bit, then you can look at how do we apply the algorithms that run in these big supercomputer centers or can be pushed all the way down to the edge, but that utterly automates some things.
Yeah, so automation is sort of a phase 2 or phase 3. We don't want to get a single dashboard or try and boil that ocean right up front, I guess, right?
Oh, I think you want to get a dashboard that gives you information to let you learn. But
Right.
the automation, I see almost as phase 6 in a lot of cases.
Oh, really? That far down the road? What do you
No, I
see?
totally agree with Farrell. I mean, he basically explained the whole situation. I mean, you first have to get the data. Once you get the data, then you can manipulate and automate it the way you want. And going back to ClearBlade use case, where they were able to get 100 million devices connected in the cloud. Just to give you guys some details, they did that with one single instance running the cloud. When you talk about cloud that you can scale up to whatever you need, imagine how much more devices they can get if they keep adding more nodes or even a cluster in different regions. So it's fantastic. I mean, what we can do today.
Well, let me poke a little bit at Oracle and cloud, if you will, for a couple of minutes. So, it's always great fun. So poke underneath a little bit for me about what's really the role, the underlying role of cloud computing in this environment of Internet of Things?
Well, I think I mentioned that before, but cloud computing is basically the backbone for the IoT. So you need to have a way for your data to travel to this destination. And with the whole cloud environment, you can get your data anywhere you want. So based on the cloud provider data centers, you can have your data in your own country, because there's some countries that they not let the data go out of their boundaries, like for example Canada. So having that option or that opportunity to have a machine close to your end user or respecting your local laws, that's unbelievable today. And not just the fact that you no longer need to maintain a whole data center for that. There's those aspects of the cloud or the on-premise environment, like the over-provisioning, under-provisioning, paying for things that you're not using or you're barely using. So there's a whole lot of discussion that we can go on top of that, like TCO analysis, or what you can save about moving to the cloud. So yeah, it's a very interesting topic.
What about things like performance, latency, privacy? I mean, we've spent a great deal of time thinking about how to deliver video services, and then we get into the whole issue of that synchronous data flows and latency issues, but also you sort of crack the topic of we start taking data from other countries and putting it in data centers that may reside. To talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities of that.
Yeah, that's another very interesting question that I usually talk with my customers and partners about latency. So for example, Oracle Cloud, we have milliseconds latency between one availability domain and another. So each cloud region has at least 3 availability domains. So in case one availability domain goes down, your services will be kept running in other locations. In our cloud that we work with ClearBlade, we use what we call bare metal shape. So other cloud providers, they provide you with virtual machines running on top of a hypervisor. And with Oracle Cloud, you do have that option, but you also have what we call a bare metal machine, a physical machine. That will give you better performance, better I/O, better throughput, and that's the one that the ClearBlade team had a chance to test their POC on. And it all depends on your business and technical requirements. Each customer will have a different discussion, but we do have options. So for example, going back to your network question, so if you need to have a dedicated bandwidth between your local data center and Oracle data center, we offer that option. You can use internet for data if you want. If you want to have your cloud environment completely closed from the internet, you can do that. You can create what we call an extension of your on-premises environment, but in the cloud, being maintained and managed by Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. It all depends on what you guys are looking for. So I believe that each customer will have a different discussion, different requirements. Some might have similar requirements. It's just a matter of understanding better your use case, so we can talk about it.
Talk a little bit about that privacy issue when data center, you're pulling maybe data out of Canada for data centers here in the U.S. or Germany. What kind of what should be on people's minds, I guess?
Yeah, governance is very important. So in the cloud, you have the option to select where your data will be available, when it will be available, and who can get access to that. That goes along with compliance requirements as well. So we do offer the compliance requirements based on your needs and requirements, reports, data centers. Our data centers, they are all layer 4 that they call, top security. Top security has been, and it is a top priority for us, Oracle. Our first customer when Oracle opened the door was CIA. So you can imagine that security is something very important for us, and we keep the same level or even superior in the cloud. And I would say the security is the main question that I get from every single customer that I speak with about cloud, and it's a very interesting topic to talk about because there's a lot of factors you can consider, like you have the data center security options, you have additional options like web application firewalls, intrusion detection systems. You gotta train your people as well. It's not just hardware, but people. So make sure that your team is not posting their passwords on their computer or laptop. So it's a very interesting subject to talk about.
Aaron, do you want to weigh in this cloud topic area?
Well, with the cloud, it's interesting. It grows. Well, I'll talk first about kind of the data that gets to the cloud. I think we've had Edge brought up multiple times as well. I think the Edge helps solve that problem. So you're getting data, it's in the cloud. You want to be sure it's secure. But should you have sent it up there in the first place is also a question, right?
Interesting.
IoT.
What's that mean?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that very innocuous products that you might go buy off any shelf and use in your home are now internet enabled. And in the US, we seem okay with that data going to any cloud anywhere, but certainly a lot of countries don't want how much you use your toothbrush.
Or Nest thermostat
or any of that stuff going up to another country's cloud. All that stuff violates. But so as you're trying to make these solutions, and that's usually more of an enterprise way you're viewing it, if we want to make these solutions, and we do want data about that Nest or that door lock, but we want to anonymize it and take away the information that might violate the privacy laws, we can do that with that edge processing. We can still glean that insight we actually want, take that data set down into something that's very anonymous and give that back. So then when we do get audited and we do have to look across that data, we can say this is very much right in line with the contracts and stuff we put in place with our customers.
Interesting. You know, one of the things I think about in a new frontier like IoT is sort of the openness of different technologies. When I think about cloud, I think about AWS, I think about Azure, I think about Google. I don't necessarily think about Oracle and cloud, right?
Yeah.
So how open is the Oracle cloud? And can people in the audience here take advantage of some of the tools and tricks of the trade that they normally do in some of their deployments to take advantage of as they take a look at IoT and this new frontier to take advantage of working with Oracle?
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, Oracle is not late to the cloud. So we started this whole cloud strategy more than 10 years ago when we started moving our Fusion apps to the cloud. Those were our first software as a service applications, even though the name SaaS did not exist at that time. Then later on, we started moving our PaaS service to the cloud, like database, Java cloud services. Then 3 years ago, we started infrastructure as a service. And last year, we launched what we call Generation 2 infrastructure service, where you can have the bare metal shapes, like I told you, and virtual machines. And now going back to your question, Oracle Cloud is based on open standards, so it's very easy to get in and get out. Other cloud vendors, like you just mentioned, for example, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they're very easy to get in, but to get out, then you're going to have a separate conversation for that.
It's not always a good conversation, is it?
Yeah, I totally agree. So actually, the open standard things is something that I work on my daily basis with partners to help them integrate their services with Oracle Cloud. And we provide access to the UI, console, APIs. It's all based on open standards, like I said before. So there's no vendor locked-in issue with Oracle. So that's something that I usually talk with my customers, because when you say Oracle, say, you guys are going to get me in, but I'm not going to be able to get out later, right? No, that's not what happens. So, and I like to talk about that topic. Just make sure that people understand, okay, it's easy to get in, easy to get out. It's cloud, pay for what you're using. If you were not satisfied, then we'll try to fix the situation, but you can leave whenever you want.
Oh, well, let me press you a couple steps further here. You know, when you start thinking about the audience here and braving into this new path, what sort of things should an enterprise be looking at when they're selecting a cloud vendor, and especially when they start thinking about the scalability issues that, as Aaron has pointed out, I think one success sort of begets another. I think about hotels who have done some work in monitoring their environment, and all of a sudden they say, well, there's a lot of things we could do about getting more clean by controlling lights better and motion better and barometric pressure and temperature and all these other things. So inevitably, the minute somebody deploys one instance of IoT in some form, all these other requirements just seem to magically bubble up to the surface. So thinking about what cloud looks like and what are the kinds of options that are available, I think become really, really key.
Yeah. So when you're looking for a cloud provider, make sure that the cloud provider can help you with all of your requirements. So for example, there's some cloud providers that are very good with infrastructure as a service, but when you start talking about integrating your infrastructure service with platform as a service or software as a service, then things start to get more interesting. So if you need more than just compute, if you need to have your database in the cloud or your SaaS applications in the cloud, those are things you should be looking in a cloud provider. Scalability and elasticity, those are very key components of a cloud provider that the cloud provider has to provide to you guys as well. Not just that, but it has to be predictable as well, like cost and performance. So you got to be able to understand if you're going to get the power you need to process your IoT information, and whenever you need that, and wherever you need that, based on the location that you need to get that information. So those are very good aspects of requirements that you need to be looking for in a cloud provider when looking for one. And cost. Here we need to talk about cost. So cost is very important. It's not just being able to provide you the best resource, but also being able to provide you the best cost as well. Because at the end, what matters for you guys is about how much money you can save and how much more you can do. So those are things you should definitely be looking for when looking
Aaron,
for
why
cloud
don't you weigh in
providers.
on some of these things?
Yeah, so we've worked across a number of clouds. As a matter of fact, we tend to say make sure we run across all of the clouds. That's our moment in this kind of vendor agnostic in and out. And so we've certainly tried them all, and we've really learned that a lot depends on our own maturity when we look at cloud vendors, who can help us solve problems that are out of scope for us. Right? We have certain expertise, but when it's beyond that, who wants to be our partner?
That's probably a good recommendation for a lot of organizations, is take a look at who you're already in with cloud or hybrid cloud or so on and so forth, right?
Yep, another area where we look really hard, and there's a lot of sides to the coin, but we found that if we get better performance, then we need a lot less compute. So,
That's interesting. Talk a little bit about that.
yeah, so we've been across multiple clouds, and certainly our software's improved and gotten more performant as its own. But just moving major systems from one cloud to another, we watched our bill fall to a third at times.
Wow.
Now those came with the cost of we lost a lot of support and stuff along the way. But for us, we can really see value in performance and bringing our own skills up because we do bring that cloud infrastructure cost down.
So let's come back to something you mentioned earlier about tools and testing. Talk a little bit about sort of the range of options. It's not, it seems to me some of the things I'm hearing from you is modeling this performance that you just mentioned and other things. So how should people approach testing, and what are the kinds of optimizations, I guess? Is optimization one of the things that's really on?
So, I'll say I think what we're doing with Oracle and proving here is a little ahead of where most folks are, right? I mean, there's not 100 million device
Endpoints
systems
anywhere,
that I know that I'm working with right now in my customers. I know all of them look like these profiles of, once we connect this one device in our factory or on our rail system, now we have the pattern for how this thing runs everywhere, right? So we might have had 10 sensors on one freight car. What does that mean when we put it on every train out there all along the way, and they can immediately see that scalability problem. But the tools today that we look at are often real targeted towards that one sensor on that one spot, testing that. The tools that we need or are going to need are the tools that you can go and you can hit a few buttons against the cloud like Oracle's that immediately spans out and says, all right, here's what it looks like to test a car, a train, all your trains, and that takes lots and lots of compute. There is no just buy one software license and test for that. It's a full-on run many different instances of compute, simulate every device having an open static connection. Sadly, you guys give me these cloud guys have a nice big bill that goes along with this performance test, right? But
Right.
Tear it all down when you're done, so you only pay for that test along the way. And that's where I think testing has to really get to.
I think if I pull out apart a little bit, it also says that some of the organizations that you're looking at are starting fairly small and straightforward, and they're getting to understand what that edge looks like, how that data is transposing itself into or through the core, and then into the dashboards and monitoring. But it very quickly becomes much more than the spray and pray problem, right? In that the sensors are going to grow, the opportunities are going to grow, and so it feels like they really have to start thinking about that and build that in architecturally up front, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you don't, there's this whole world of, you want to just barely give the just enough to solve the problem, improve, and I think that's still valid. But I think you need to recognize very early the layers of how you're going to scale, the layers of how you're going to address that problem, because there's no time to start over in that moment of as it starts to roll out. You have to understand, or what happens when the data explodes, what happens when the number of devices and open connections all explode, what happens when we can't afford to ingress all of the data coming off these things and we need to process locally. How do we get that in place all along the way? What are our strategies going to be so that we can push logic further down without having to send thousands of people back out into the field to apply firmware, right? All these sorts of things you don't want to build them all right away, but you want to put yourself in a spot where you can solve those problems very elegantly when they happen.
So build a whiteboard model that says, here's where we're going to start. We can measure some risk. We understand the time frame. Let's get that win. But architecturally on that same whiteboard, we're looking at what phase 2 looks like, what phase 3 looks like, and keep yourself focused as you're.
This box becomes these boxes,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Yeah,
Right,
absolutely.
right. Now, is that true in the way that people should approach how they buy cloud, how they start thinking about in terms of the elasticity that you were talking about, in terms of on-demand compute power or on-demand storage? I mean, is that something you're seeing as well?
Yes, I mean, it's always important to understand better what your requirements are first. And then start slow. That's what we usually recommend in cloud. Do some test and dev, make sure that your applications are performing the way you want, and mainly that your end users are getting the results that they need to get. Then once that phase has been done, then yeah, go to phase 2, go bigger, and keep growing. So I had an opportunity to be part of a POC with a different customer. We started with just 6 terabytes of data for phase 1. Phase 2 was 50 terabytes, and then phase 4 was supposed to replicate their production environment with more than 100 terabytes of data in the cloud.
100 terabytes.
100 terabytes of data. Yeah, that was for HPC app. Yeah, that was crazy. I don't know what we were doing with that data, but that was an interesting case. And the whole POC phase, they grew up accordingly with their requirements. So we started with just 6 nodes based on what ClearBlade used. Then the second phase was 10. And the fourth, I mean, just keeping 3, but the fourth phase, I think we had 60 physical nodes with 36 procs each one to process that amount of data that we were working on. So going back to the ClearBlade case here, I mean, we managed to replicate 100 million devices. I mean,
wow.
That was unbelievable. I mean, and that was just using one single bare metal shape. I mean, again, go back to your requirements. That's the beauty of the cloud. You can scale up whenever you need, and if you don't need, scale down. Stop paying for that.
You know, there's been still a lot of debates about when to use cloud, and it usually centers not just on the CapEx versus OpEx issue, but it's also about security. So rather than starting with Oracle, I'm going to start with you. How secure is the cloud?
Well, let's start with IoT, right?
Yeah, let's start with, you're a good point. Let's start with IoT. Then we'll let Gilson weigh.
Yeah, you solved that problem. Actually, so to start with that, the reality is I don't think anyone solves that problem. One vendor solves that problem.
One cloud vendor?
I don't think one vendor in IoT solves that problem.
Okay.
I think that problem is too big and it has to be thought across too many points of threat. Right? So you may have the hardware itself. Where is that hardware? Is it physically exposed for someone to attack physically? Mm-hmm. Is it exposed because the default operating system isn't locked down or kept up to date? So that bare kind of environment of just getting that there before you even talk about the application that we're trying to build on top of it.
Right.
We see a lot of kind of legacy stuff, that brownfield environment where security was never worried about because it was trusted behind a wall. So when you're bringing on devices that communicate over OPC, right, some of these SCADA systems or over Modbus, these older protocols, there's no idea of security in that. So they're just going to stream that off. So then you have to look at how do we inject a layer of security before those things go running off to the internet. Because when it gets to the cloud, it's got to be secure, but it's got to get there first. It's got to travel over something. And so then you're building this local area, and there's security of now you've made a point to secure it, but now you've made yet another spot for someone to come in and hack what's going on. So now a new device to secure. All before we even really started with, we're translating that data, even if we do it securely, back up to the cloud. And then when it lands in the cloud, the threats there are
That's our problem.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Right.
So yeah, I mean, in the cloud, going along with Aaron said, there are a lot of factors you can consider, like for example, using encryption, using virtual private network. If you need your data to be out of the internet, you can use
Virtual private network, is that what you said?
Yeah, virtual
just
private
like that,
network,
yeah.
a VPN, and you can use dedicated bandwidth between your data center and the cloud if you don't want your data to be exposed in the cloud. There are other options like in Oracle, for example, we do have this cloud at customer that you can have Oracle Cloud, but in your data center for the data that cannot get out of your environment. There, like Aaron just said, I mean, it's a combination of factors that will make your data and your network safe. But you got to use them, and you got to train your people too, like I said before. So it's a very interesting topic to talk about.
One of the things that when I read between the lines of what you guys are saying is that, a lot of the headlines of the breaches that have taken place and the lack of I'll call it cyber hygiene for the lack of a better word, really have been breaches that are focused more on data at rest than anything else. When I start thinking about IoT and some of the things that you both have been saying here the last couple of minutes, I think organizations need to be thinking a lot more about data in transit, right? Because what we're talking about is these endpoints propagating various forms of personal and non-personal data through a lot of different architectures. Does that make sense to you, or is it?
Yeah, well, I think personal and non-personal data, but even it's proprietary to your business data. It's
Right.
how your machines are functioning. It's their rate of production. It's that kind of information, and I'll throw a little more, fear into it. We're making these machines actionable. It's not just to get the data out. It's to go in and change the fact of what kind of energy are we really using. Should we be turning down the production of compressed air in our factory because we don't need that much generation?
Right.
When you start talking about that actionable side, you really have to make sure you've looked through the whole life cycle of that transaction to secure it. Because
I guess a supply chain of data all the way through, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to
increasing the focus of data in motion, I guess, becomes really a big deal.
Yeah, and you mentioned the other day about a situation where people jumping on to the network somewhere along the way, just playing and leveraging it for their own use of having fun, but that injection of new data that's unexpected, how does that impact you all along the way as well?
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's really interesting. I'm going to maybe put out one more question, but I want you in the audience to think about any questions that you may have relative to this topic, and I'm going to open it up here in a minute. One of the things that I was thinking about here has a lot to do with, I guess, how do you build architecture in a way that helps you define success? Or maybe the question is, when you have worked with some of your customers, how do they define success, right? To give people who are sitting there thinking about the art of the possible with IoT, and thinking about some of the recommendations you both made about, starting with this block and staying focused on that and moving through. What kind of examples have people talked about, or you've actually seen in terms of the implementation, where people are defining success and achieving success? I mean, be as specific as you can in some of these instances.
Yeah, I think I'll go first, but I think some of the things that I've seen is people kind of go into it with the idea of future-proofing. I won't say that their first version of their IoT project went in with that way. Very often it was what's possible, and let's just prove it. Almost every version 2 was we found a bunch of limitations here, a bunch of things where we didn't quite achieve what we want. We want to now build the solution of, now that we know what's possible, and we want to future-proof it.
Yep.
Everyone has to make a decision if you're going to get started. But as you make those decisions, you have to look at, to your point, of if Oracle Cloud isn't right for us, can we move off of Oracle Cloud?
So portability.
Portability.
Right.
Scalability.
Yeah. And if Oracle, how does Oracle grow with us over time? And how can we just change some of these things very quickly as we move forward? So a lot of the success I see are people who are looking at, we know we're going to adopt these standards, we're going to use this infrastructure, we're going to use these vendors to help us get there from here, we're going to light up these facilities, but how do we change those decisions and keep things going in the right direction as time moves on?
Right. What do failures look like? I mean, from my vantage point, we all learn from failures, and I always say to people, figure out those failures, fail fast, and move fast forward. What's failure look like?
I've seen some overthinking.
Well, talk about it.
I've seen some overthinking, right? You turn us loose and to solve these problems, and people will solve for the 100 million device when we really need to connect to. And so I would say that there's certainly a failure of over-engineering in real life. A lot of folks have gone in and focused on kind of the bigger picture elements when really we need to just take that step one.
Right.
Trying to do machine learning before we had any data, right? How are you going to learn on that data? That's those sorts of things. I would say they've seen some failures there. I've seen some failures with some of the technologies, quite frankly, right? We're trying to use some of these new augmented reality, or you're trying to use some of these new, very fine-tuned positioning with new radio spectrums. Those things are all being proven out as well. So I think you start to learn what use case is right for what. Some radio frequencies don't work in large buildings. Some radio frequencies won't scan as far as you need them to when you're trying to do positioning.
Right.
So there's a lot of due diligence that
Kids come in with Game Boys and jam them in retail stores. That's the example we were talking about yesterday. Yeah. All right, question from the audience. Somebody's got to have some questions. There we go.
You guys had talked a little bit about data privacy before, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the general data protection regulation that's coming out next year in Europe. Goes live in the end of April 2018. GDPR for
GDPR, yeah.
So that's a good question. From my point of view, I think that the data regulation, I mean, depending on the country that we're going to be dealing with, it has to be analyzed. And in the cloud, that goes along with the capability that I told you guys before about, I mean, if the data regulation requires you to keep your data in the country, you have that capability. And you also have data governance as well, that can manage where your data will be located and who will be accessing your data as well. That's definitely one of the benefits of the cloud. I mean, if you're going to do that by yourself, I mean, your company, you're going to have to go through legal process to maybe open a data center in that specific location that the data cannot get out, and that can be complex and very expensive. And today, for example, if I decide to have a machine in Frankfurt or Australia or China, in a couple minutes I can spin up a machine over there, and it will be there, and my data can be there. But that's a great question. Yeah.
I think one of the messages, we talked a little bit about this last night, and I think, Aaron, you had pointed out, is from the get-go, get compliance and governments folks to start thinking about that. I mean, that has to be sort of a key component of the architecture. It's not just about the endpoints and the cloud computing piece, but thinking about the bigger picture that has a lot to do with the business impact, right?
And I think the data privacy, I think it's only going to grow, right? We're going to find more and more, and so it might feel onerous now, but it's going to be more and more restrictive and new ways to look at the data. I think that's why when you talk about what's important about these common architectures we're seeing, that edge is important, because you might have the same application distributed around the world, but you're going to change what that data comes off all around the world. So all the edges in Germany are going to behave one way, still give you the data you need to operationally run and put it across geographically back to your back office.
Right.
But being able to change that profile to comply is going to become really important as well, because, again, things are moving so quickly and we're finding new areas of vulnerability.
Right.
And that happens today, actually. I mean, when we talk about the hospital, they do have their own requirements, their compliance requirements for their data to be going out from their own premises to the cloud. When you're talking with credit card companies, they have the same requirements today, so that's not something new that we don't see yet. I mean, that is happening now. But yeah, that's definitely a great question.
Another question from the audience? Right.
Do you perceive that within Internet of Things that the cloud is going to scale into stateless data lakes? Do you foresee it's going to scale into stateless data lakes and form its own, essentially its own living archive? Do you foresee that it's going to dynamically fluctuate as the sensor feeds instantiate and then they end of life and have no more use. Where do you see the cloud growing in the future?
Good question. So for the cloud, there are different ways you can store your data. So you can use, for example, a solid-state disk to keep your data, block storage, and when you no longer need that data, for example, for data retention, you can move that data to archive, which is very more cost-effective than using solid-state to manipulate your information. So yes, I mean, it's an easy way to transition from one side to the other without impacting your business. So you could potentially just keep the data, get rid of all the nodes that are using your information. Then later on, if you need, you can just bring those nodes back online and bring your data again if you need to do some sort of a manipulation or processing information, for example.
Right. One more question, Mark, I think. Yeah.
Yes, good morning. Oracle Open was last week, I believe, or the week before.
Last week.
I was wondering if there were any major announcements made related to IoT or perhaps Oracle cloud computing and et cetera.
Yeah, so we actually have some very good announcements last week. We announced our first AI database. It's fully automated. And that's when Larry went on stage and said that we are going to put in a contract that our cost is going to be half of what Amazon is charging their customers for. And
He threw a shot across the bow there, right?
Yeah, that was a very interesting announcement. I'm pretty sure that the Amazon people did not like that, but that's true. That's one big thing. So you're going to get in your contract that your cost is going to be half of what Amazon charged you for. Other major announcements we had in regards to infrastructure as a service was that ClearBlade team, that 100 million device they tested, the shape they used it, we're going to provide a better shape by the end of November for the same price. So if ClearBlade team decides to do the same POC again, end of November, they'll definitely get better results for the same cost, just to give you an idea. Yeah, there were other major announcements, but I think these two ones are very good ones to share with you. So yeah, but if you want, we can talk in one-on-one later on.
I'm going to close with the last question, and that is, first, an observation. You know, throughout the years, I see a lot of budding relationships between large and small companies that are one company's taking advantage of the other. Maybe the small's taking advantage of the big brand, and the big brand is looking and learning from the technologist and doing all the hard work on the other side. But one of the things I learned from these guys is this is very much a very mutual relationship, all about bringing great benefits to customers. So I have to ask the question, first of all, congratulations on that kind of relationship. And second, because you've been doing so much work together, what's next? What are the next kind of things that you guys are thinking about on behalf of your clients?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely we're built on infrastructure like Oracle's, right? We run on top of that. And so there are ways that we're going to be able to expand that POC beyond one single shape, but into a cluster of shapes, right? So that he's going to give us a bigger, better one, and we're going to be able to cluster that. So that test is going to be able to say something that is
That scale.
That's really scale, right? So that's certainly our roadmap there. But then as you talk about what you're able to do, you can tell the story together of here's how it comes as a package, right?
Right,
and
right.
we're doing the same sort of stuff with some great partners in the hardware space as well, so that it's not so much of finding all these shelves together. You can see how they come together in a scaled solution.
Yeah, it's a win-win situation for both sides. I mean, ClearBlade is now part of the Oracle community, and for the customers, whenever they want to use ClearBlade and Oracle Cloud, yes, you can do that today. So it's not just about being the Dave and Goliath thing, but
marriage
it's
made in
helping each
heaven.
other. Yeah. So like I said, it's a win-win for both sides, and I'm very happy to be here today representing Oracle, along with Arrow and the ClearBlade team as well.
Great. Well, thanks so much, guys. It's been great. Thank you all.